Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai. Welcome to the 2024 University of Auckland Early Childhood Seminar Series August Seminar. We'll begin our time together with karakia. Me enoi tātou. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa. Haumi e, hui e, hai ki e. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation by Dr. Raella Kahuroa from the University of Waikato. We're delighted to have Raella with us to share her research exploring how young children's working theories can be used to develop children's criticality and insight. If questions arise for you during the presentation that you would like to ask Raella, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and she'll respond to them at the end of her presentation. You can also use the chat function throughout the presentation to connect with each other and the panelists. After the seminar, a recording will be available on our Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel. Besides offering this Early Childhood Seminar Series, the University of Auckland also offers a range of early childhood focused courses and programs of study, including a Master of Education Early Childhood specialisation. This flexible program is tailored for teachers, researchers, social workers and more, and leads from postgraduate certification to a master's degree. A University of Auckland Master of Education Early Childhood will equip you with sought-after skills, including critical thinking and advocacy for diverse communities. As part of this evening's seminar, we're offering one lucky audience member the opportunity to win a free enrolment for a postgraduate paper. So if you hold domestic student status and are interested in a free postgrad paper, please complete the poll at the bottom of your screen before 5:10. We'll announce the lucky winner at the end of the seminar, and Anita, our postgrad coordinator, will contact you with further details on how to enrol. I will now pass over to Professor Helen Hedges to welcome and introduce Dr. Kahuroa.
Kia ora, Justine. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Raella Kahuroa had experience as a teacher and leader in a range of early childhood settings before becoming a lecturer at the University of Waikato. She became involved in research as a teacher partner, then research assistant, laying the foundations for her own research career. I first became aware of Raella 3 years ago when she wrote about working theories and was so excited to find someone else keen to explore these ideas to support teacher practice. So it's a real pleasure to introduce her to present our seminar today. Raella was the recipient of the New Zealand Association for Research and Education Lynn Foot Award for Early Childhood Research in 2022 for her PhD titled Critical Pedagogy in Early Childhood Education, 4 case studies in Aotearoa New Zealand that explored elements of democracy and critical thinking with children. While early childhood education nationally and internationally has consistently articulated goals of social justice and equity, and the scholarship has been broad, there's been little evidence-based research to support early childhood teachers to understand critical pedagogy. In her thesis and publications, Raella makes critical pedagogy explicit and accessible to teachers through examples of dialogic and relational engagements with children. Significantly, beyond one-off examples, her thesis showed ways these engagements were revisited so that young children were supported to think critically about their relationships with each other and to develop working theories about environmental and social issues, a truly vital part of teachers' work with children globally and locally in the 21st century. In her presentation today, Raella will explore with us in-depth ways arts-based pedagogies can provide teachers with tools to explore working theories over time. We look forward to your insights, Raella. Ngā mihi, over to you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Helen and Justine. Ko kahura na ki tōku maunga. Ko kahura na ki tōku marae. Ko ngā rūroro tōku awa. Ko te hapuku tōku tipuna. Ko ngā te rangi koe na ki tōku hapu. Ko ngā te kahununu ki heratonga tōku iwi. Ko Raella tōku ingoa. Kia ora, my name is Raella, and I like to start with my pepeha, which is in that particular one is my father's one. It connects me back to the East Coast. And today I'm going to be talking about, Helen had mentioned that my PhD work was focused on critical pedagogy. Through that work, I found that working theories were emerged as a really strong way to help children develop criticality. And I've pulled out two stories from the thesis work, which could help us look at how a couple of teachers did that in particular. Before we get started on that, I'm just going to do a little bit of work on the framework I'm using today. I wanted to start, if I can get it. Oh yes, there we go. With this quote: "To think is human. Everyone thinks. However, not everyone thinks well, and not all educators teach students how to think well." And I like this quote. It's actually from an article. It was the first few lines of an article, but I thought it read a little bit like a poem, and that's how I've spaced it out here. And this particular quote addresses something I'm super passionate about, and that is thinking well, particularly in early childhood. Early childhood educators, we do amazing things with children. And I am very interested in how we explore, extend, and support thinking about complex topics, thinking about things that are important to children, thinking about things from their worlds, from their experiences. I can get quite caught up on that, so I will keep going, but I like this idea. I guess it was part of the pursuit of my own teaching career to figure out how to help students think well. I hope this can be a goal of yours as well, in some particular way. I'd like to start by talking about the context, the centre that I worked in. Now, for ethics reasons, I can't actually name the centre itself. I can name the teachers and the children by first name, but not the centre. So I've in my research, I called it the kindergarten, and I've included just a few photos of there. The kindergarten is a faith-based early childhood setting, but takes the approach of supporting Christian morals and values rather than observing specific elements of worship. It's located in middle-class Auckland suburb, and it's been operating since 1973, starting as a playgroup and then eventually becoming a kindergarten that caters for both sessional and full-day school day attendance. Now, at the time of the research, the centre was quite ethnically diverse, with those identified as Chinese making up about 61% of the families, and children from European or Pākehā families being the second largest, and the remainder were a variety of different cultures, usually ones and twos. And there are 4 teachers at this centre, magnificent, deeply patient teachers. And it's part of their work that I would like to share with you today. Okay, now I think it's worthwhile because there's lots of ways to conceive of criticality. Just giving a little overview of how I'm conceiving of it. So the phrase we came to use in the research was working in the critical landscape. And we use this idea of landscape as an orienting metaphor to try and help us see the space that we were working in. So my original name for it was the cultural, political, economic, social landscape, which is kind of a mouthful, so you can understand how later this got condensed down to the critical landscape. However, the first long-winded name was useful because it helped us see the different spheres of influence, the different forces that operate in a critical landscape. And that could help us identify what potential topics that could qualify for perhaps some critical pedagogy investigation. Now, these unseen critical landscapes nonetheless impact us in real and unseen ways. on our respective realities. And this includes the kind of experiences we gain and how those experiences are validated. And these critical landscapes, as I've mentioned, are just as real as the physical ones we can see and touch in terms of the influence and force they can have upon our lives. So it was this sort of metaphor that we used. Some of the broad things that we were looking for, because when we're talking about criticality, people usually go back to the idea of critical thinking skills, and this definitely touches on that. But the reason I like using a critical landscape metaphor is because it places those skills in a context. Within a problem, it gives them a space to be used and worked on. So if I were to talk about critical thinking skills as somewhat discrete, I might be talking about things like mental processes used to make decisions and to solve problems. I could be talking about some kind of analysis, evaluation, or inference. I could be talking about some kind of reasoning used to make judgments or decisions, or an ability to view a topic from multiple perspectives. These are the kinds of tools I would use, but I'm going to use them in this landscape space. And another reason I do like the landscape idea is because it gives us an idea of what we should be doing there. If I go to a new place and I stand in it, I'm going to look around and I'm going to figure out where in that landscape I want to go. Where in that landscape I perhaps want to spend my time. I'm going to do something there. And this is the idea with, I guess, the underlying critical pedagogy framework, that this is a doing pedagogy. We're not going to quite get all the way through the doing today. We're going to focus more on the way that working theories are used, but it's worthwhile framing that up at the start. Now, sometimes there is of course, the line of thought of why use criticality at all in the early years. I found the work of Vivienne Vasquez quite influential. She's a Canadian-American academic, and she worked in a related field called critical literacy. They have reasonably similar philosophies, just slightly different ways of going about it. She did a lot of work with young children in the critical space, and she made the observation that children are both capable and willing to participate in hard conversations that are meaningful to them. And I have to add that the meaningful to them part is really significant, or socially significant in some way, or that impact children's lives. If you get that connection, and this is where I usually like to encourage that child-led approach. We're really childhood teachers, we do child-led. It applies in this as much as anything. In fact, it definitely applies in this, because the kind of work you do in criticality requires a fairly high level of cognitive engagement, of some emotional engagement, of a little bit of investment. So you definitely want to be doing something that matters to the group you're working with. Vasquez also shared that she has had over the years, teachers express some concerns that use of potentially mature topics could take childhood away from children. However, she has found that analysing an issue in different ways and taking the opportunity to theorise changes and improvements can be challenging, yet enjoyable for both students and teachers. And the two investigations or stories, I should say, that we're going to look at today do have some elements of potentially risk in them. But we're going to see how these teachers handle them. They definitely do it in ways that are appropriate for children. And again, this is another reason why I like topics to come for children. They tend to bring up topics that they're ready to discuss. Vasquez also points out that when adults restrict the literacies and discourses that children have access to, then the child's world becomes bound. And by bound, we mean limited. So, for example, you can't learn to engage with a resource that you don't have, that you've never touched, that you've never experimented with. And the same thing holds true of ideas. When we make ideas, discourses, stories available to children, their world gets a little bigger, particularly if we're doing it in a way where we're scaffolding and supporting children. That world gets a little bit bigger for them, and their ability to respond to the world in complex and nuanced ways also gets a little bit better. And lastly, Quinn, moving away from Vasquez for a moment, Quinn also talks about work with criticality as engaging the intellectual curiosity of children. And this is something that I found particularly satisfying about going through this work. Okay, and probably just because I did say we were talking about working theories, I just want to touch on what I'm meaning by working theories as we're going through this. I am using Helen's own definition, and now as I'm thinking that, I'm praying I've cited her correctly. But she talked about working theories as theories in progress, theories that are prone to revision, to speculation, to testing, allowing children to revisit, edit, and even reject their preliminary working theories. And we're going to see some of that today in the examples I've selected. Now, as I've mentioned in this research, working theories weren't a direct focus, but they emerged as really significant during the research. They were already embedded in the practice of this kindergarten. I just came along with my camera and filmed a whole bunch of it, and then did some theorising about that. I found that working theories are valuable in critical contexts, like, for example, these critical pedagogy contexts, as working theories make children's thinking visible, both to teachers and to other children. And this is hugely important when you are engaging in a thinking subject, when you're working on that whole learning how to think idea from the opening quote. You definitely want to have some a way to make what's being thought visible. Now, this visibility created opportunities to examine working theories through the lens of critique, and also to share different perspectives about an inquiry or question. So we're going to move on now and have a look at two stories. Now, there were multiple stories that could have been told. In the interests of time, I've chosen two that were quite different. They took fairly different approaches to using working theories, and to elaborating and building on working theories, and to offering ways to correct them. And I thought the two approaches could be useful to us today. Now, just a heads up, the first story has lots of pretty pictures, because there was a lot of arts-based pedagogy in that particular approach. The second story was a dialogic approach. So I have no pictures, but some really interesting discussions and conversations from children. So let's get started with story number one. This comes from Olivia, who is one of the kaiako teachers at the kindergarten. And she had been doing some work on belonging with the children that had gone on for some months. And at this point, she'd said to me that they'd looked at the past in relation to the land they lived on, they'd looked at the present, and now she wanted to look to the future. And so she spent some time gathering different groups of children and asking them, what is your dream for New Zealand? Lovely open-ended question. Something that matters. And children had a variety of responses. Many of these were worthy working theories in their own right. Today, we're going to talk about Calvin's. Now, Calvin took a theorizing approach to even decide on what his dream was. He actually went through different permutations. Barbie was always in there, but at one point Barbie was Elsa and Barbie was something else. But he eventually arrived on the idea that he would like a Barbie doll that looked like his sister Kara. And that was his vision for New Zealand, but also mainly for Calvin. It was important to Calvin. And this became a really important story that captivated the kindergarten for, I want to say weeks, but I think it actually was a couple of months, on and off. Now, because Calvin and his family identified as Chinese, this desired doll that he wanted, this doll that looked like a sister, became known as Chinese Barbie, hence the name of the story. And the picture here is the first picture that Calvin drew of this Barbie that he wanted. The bigger figure being his sister, and the littler figure being him holding Barbie's hand. The reason he wanted it to be his sister, she was his best friend. They were very close, and I think this was a way that he had of connecting for her. So we're going to go through some of the examples now of the learning of how this learning theory of what a Chinese Barbie looked like evolved, because that was became a big question for the children. So we're going to look at how the story evolved over a few different episodes. Not all of them, I've just picked a couple. how it evolves through group contexts, and also some of the different approaches used by Olivia, the teacher, to extend and develop children's thinking about this initial working theory. So initial working theory, what does a Chinese Barbie look like? Let's have a look at the first go of this. So actually, I shouldn't say first, I've picked about 3 examples, I think, because there were quite a few things they did. So one of the strengths, things that Olivia's amazing at, is using arts-based pedagogies to develop working theories. So there was a lot of thinking, what would the face of this Barbie look like? And some of this isn't exactly working theory stuff, it's on the way to working theories. It's playing with ideas, it's putting out points, it's sharing with the group, and it's doing a bit of analysis and comparison as these ideas get shaped, changed, edited even a little bit. So I've got a little bit of dialogue here from this. The teaching sequence was actually about, from memory, around 20 minutes long, could have been a little more or a little less. So Olivia says, look at the way that she draws. Does she meaning the child who is drawing on the paper, does she, Caro, look like that? Caro being the sister. And Nina says, yes, that's good. Now, after Nina, both Ruben and Eva take turns and they discuss their pictures in a similar way. And you can see their pictures there on the paper. They've drawn different pictures of the eyes because they're really interested in how the eyes of this doll could look. They have realized that the eyes from discussions with other children in the kindergarten, that the eyes of someone who's Chinese can look a little bit different from the eyes of someone who's perhaps come from a more Western context. And so they're experimenting with this in a playful and non-judgmental way. So one of the things Olivia did, well, 2 things really, that she's done to help them work on this theory about the eyes, the shape of eyes that these children are working on, is firstly she's got them to draw, and you can sort of see in the picture, I think the middle one probably shows it best, different pictures of them drawing eyes. Now the second thing she's done is she's cleaned the face off a Barbie doll, like that, because you know how the face is painted on by the factory. She's cleaned that off so that the face is blank, and this has created an opportunity for the group to try and recreate more authentic eyes that will represent this Chinese Barbie that Calvin is so invested in. And there's a little bit of more dialogue from Olivia, and she says, I'm going to ask you to use your design for your eyes, going back to the drawing work they've done. I wonder, what will she look like? I'm going to give you a very small paintbrush and we're going to have a little play and see if she looks like his sister or not. And this language is a lovely invitation. I like the going to have a little play. It's not serious, like life and death. We're learning, we're practicing, we're taking some risks. We're going to play. And we're going to explore this idea of eyes. So they do this for a while. This was one of the ways that she started to help, because children had noticed that there were some differences, and this is a nice non-judgmental way to begin exploring that particular idea or that component of this working theory. What does a Chinese Barbie look like? The second thing we do is we get Mulan, the Chinese Barbie doll. Now, if you remember the movie Mulan, particularly the cartoon version, which is what this particular doll is based on, one of the girls had this doll and she brought it in, recognizing that Mulan was Chinese. And so she bought the doll in the costume. And you can... and they compared her to the Barbie that they already had, and they looked at the hair and they looked like the eyes. So let's just read this. Oh, I had it formatted so nicely before. Never mind. We'll read what Olivia and the children say. Olivia says, okay, let's see. I wonder now, she's got the Chinese costume, because Mulan is wearing a Chinese costume. You say she's got the black coloured eyes. What do you think, Calvin? And Calvin, who's in this particular group, says, great. Olivia says, what about you, Ava? Do you think she looks like a Chinese person now when she puts her costume on like that? Ava, yes, she does. However, Olivia's not finished yet. If the doll looks like that, can I call her Chinese? And there was a little bit of mixed discussion here. And so Olivia took a different approach. We're going to continue on the next page. Does Eva look like this? Now, Eva is also Chinese. Olivia holds up painted Barbie next to Eva. And next she holds the painted Barbie next to Ara. Both of her, Ara's Asian more than Chinese, but some similar, I think, ideas. Ara says, I have Chinese dress. Olivia says, but do you put it on every day? No, says Ara. Olivia, what about Olivia? I don't have that dress. Can I call myself Chinese? Ara, yes. Olivia holds up Mulan Barbie, they've changed her clothes and she's now wearing the pink frilly dress from the other Barbie. Olivia says she's got the Chinese hair colour and she's got a different dress. Does she look like Chinese? Calvin says no, because you changed the dress. Olivia, but the change doesn't look like her. That's interesting. And then she says to Eva, can we call her Chinese? And Eva says yes, because she had that hair. So that's a fairly long piece of dialogue. You're welcome to reread it for a moment while I talk through it. Obviously, this is a snippet. I got to see the whole thing in context. So the children have been talking about what they think a Chinese Barbie looks like, and that's required them to talk about what they think a Chinese person looks like. And one of the things they identified was that there was this there was this hair color. Most of them had black hair and brown or black eyes. And then there was the eye shape thing that they talked about in a previous example. And now we've introduced another aspect of dress. So Olivia, in this investigation of this issue, has not told the children what a Chinese Barbie looks like. She's provided lots of examples. She's used comparison here by having different pictures and different figures so that the children can do a little rationally thinking. Sorry, lost my train of thought. They can do some thinking there. If Olivia had a dress, does Olivia need to have a Chinese dress to be a Chinese person? How does that having clothing affect your cultural ethnicity? Was it more about the hair and these other features that are attached to the person? These are fairly complex ideas. They're talking about it in the way that children would talk about it, but they remain relevant. Now, the last thing they did in this, because we're looking at critical pedagogy finishes off by taking some kind of action. And in this case, the group eventually came to the decision that they couldn't make a Chinese Barbie. At one point, they dyed the doll's hair black in addition to redoing the face, in addition to changing the clothes. But they decided that they couldn't, so they decided to write a letter to the Barbie company, and here's a little image of the letter that they were working on, telling them about the efforts to recreate Barbie, and I think in the end they ended up sending the little Barbie with that they'd been working on as well, and that the little snippet there is just the story of them commencing on making this letter. So that's our first example. Lots of comparison, lots of taking things, allowing them to sit side by side, letting conversation go back and forth. The working theories emerge from the group in pieces. They're not really cohesive, really clear theories, but they are discussed, they are contested, and the process of thinking is carried out with children. All right, I'm going to move on to story 2, which is our second and last story. And this has the rather interesting name of the man who got half dead on the side of the road. And this comes from the work of Jackie. And this was explored in quite a different way. It was explored in a special kind of group work known as Godly Play. As I've mentioned, this was a Christian-informed centre. And just to give a very brief overview of Godly Play, the idea is that you present a parable using open-ended resources and without religious talk. So you don't tell the story of the Good Samaritan and call it the Good Samaritan. You tell the story of a man on a road who is beset by thieves, beaten, left on the road, and then he's passed by different people in the community, a priest. I think there was a Levite in there, you know, upstanding members of community, and it's this other man, only one man stops to help the man who's been injured. And his name, he's not called the Good Samaritan in the story. It is an open-ended play. I think Berryman, was it Berry? I have the book somewhere on my shelf. So anyway, they have these sessions and they present different parables. And this particular example came up during the first telling of the Good Samaritan. And part of the reason I've got the children's name for it is because it was never called that, and this is what they called it, because their interest was on the person who was injured. So as we go through this, and this is the one that is a little bit more text heavy, but I've tried to underline the bits of dialogue that I think are quite useful for us. In this, we're looking at the use of different contexts or topics to develop a more nuanced understanding of the ideas of good and bad and who is worthy of friendship. The entire episode and all the contexts are deeply interesting. I've just picked out a few in the interests of time. So let's start with this theory. So Jackie at this point is a little way into the story. She's just been asking some questions about the story, and she says, okay, I've got a tricky question for you. I wonder who the neighbours to these people are. And she holds up the two little figurines who were the robbers, and Ava immediately says no one, and Quinley says no one, they're stealing. Jackie says no one is their neighbour. And Ava says, she says because a few times, and then comes out with because they hurt people. And Ara adds, and steal people's things. So Jackie surmises and steals people's things so they can't have a neighbour. Quinley adds, stealed up all the treasures. Jackie says, so no one will love them. And the children pause for a moment. And then, no, because they are thieves. Now, this was the first time the story was done, and I was quite struck because I was watching this by this particular exchange. And so Jackie and I talked about it afterwards, and she agreed it was worth having another go at this particular story. So must have been about a month or so later, she revisited the story again. So we've got this original theory: robbers, bad people, not worthy of love. So, and the group consensus was quite clear on that. So we come back to this idea, and Jackie relaunches it. And when she gets again to the bit on the story where she says, who is the neighbour to this man? And she places, she placed the priest next to the injured child. The children say no. They said, no, the robbers don't have neighbours because they have been bad. So this is the second time, and this idea is still holding strength. Robbers can't have neighbours because they've been bad. And in another part of the conversation, they do discuss what is meant by a neighbour. And that ranged from everything of someone who just hangs out to a friend. So they did have a context from that. Okay, so we have this idea. Neighbours, robbers don't get to have neighbours or friends because they are bad. So Jackie begins to challenge this a little way. Now, she actually goes through, I think, about 9 different contexts. We're only going to go through a couple, starting with one. The first context she raises, who could love the robbers? So she starts off asking the children who could love the robbers, and the children say things like only their mum and dad. Ava adds, yeah, because their mum and dad are robbers too. Summer adds, and their aunties and uncles. And Jackie says, and all of their aunties and uncles, they love them, or they're robbers too. And Summer says, they're robbers too. Jackie says, they're all robbers. I wonder why they became robbers. Ava says, because their mum and dad were robbers. Jackie says, so they copied their mum and dad. And Summer adds, and their uncles. And so that we end up at this point, which is the restatement at the end of context 1. I wonder if anybody ever really was their neighbour. And one child says, never, ever, ever. And then another child adds, ever. They are really adamant. You do bad things, you don't get love, except by your bad family, your bad mum and dad, your bad uncles and aunties. It was quite a cool theory, to be honest. So that's context one. So Jackie doesn't give up at that point. And this is not about lecturing or telling anyone anything. This is about opportunities to think. So she goes through another 7 contexts. I've listed what they are here rather than attempted to sort of spell them out. Context 2 was, who is our neighbour at the kindergarten? This brought it more local and allowed the children to think about people they knew rather than this prosaic example that was out there. But there was context 3, who would be Jackie's neighbour? Because all the children had good relationships with Jackie. She was their teacher, they knew her very well, and there was lots of talk about how if she was sick, they would get her ice cream and candy and be her friend. And not the robbers, because Jackie did bring up, what if the robbers were sick? Who will bring them ice cream and be their friend? And they were like, well, you know, bad people don't get ice cream, kind of thing. Then we went on to context 4, the robbers as babies. And Jackie brought up the idea, were the robbers nice as babies? And the children said, yes, they were nice as babies. Of course they were nice as babies, because children are, you know, inherently good in this worldview. And she said, okay, but then what changed? And this is where we start to see the children starting to have some actual challenge to their ideas, that there's slightly less certainty, because if they were good as babies, why weren't they good as adults? I think we saw, not entirely sure, but I think we saw a resurgence of bad uncles and aunties and bad, you know, mums and dads at that point. So anyway, we moved on to context 5. Could the children in the group, i.e. in the kindergarten, then grow up to be bad guys? So if the robbers were nice as babies and grew up to be robbers, could these children then grow up to be bad guys? And of course the children were very adamant, no, that couldn't happen to them. And that brought us to context 6. Are there bad guys at the kindergarten? And this one was actually quite an interesting one. In the interest of time, I haven't included it, because then when that question was asked, the children did realise there were some friends at kindergarten who were having trouble getting on with others. And you'd start to see a couple of light bulbs pinging there, but they also knew that these people weren't inherently bad. But there were definitely some choices in relations to friendships that had been a bit problematic. So we start to see a little bit more of this good-bad binary chipped away at. In context 7, Jackie brought up the man under the bridge. Now, this kindergarten would go out and walk regularly, and that included walking under a local highway bridge or motorway bridge, and they'd noticed that there was a man living under there, and this had been something of great discussion for the children, wanting to know why someone would live under a bridge. And so Jackie and the teachers had been talking about this and that issue in a variety of ways. That's also a very interesting set of working theories. But she brought up this context as an example of someone who was living just a bit outside society. And the children had a lot of compassion for the man under the bridge. So that was another context that brought more empathy to this conversation. And in context 8, we come back to the parable, and Jackie comes back to this idea of the priest, and I've got a little bit of dialogue for us to have a look at here. Now, Jackie, in the story, the priest sees the injured man in the road and walks by him. In fact, I think he crosses over the street and walks by him. So Jackie now asks about the priest, and she says, what about this guy? There were the 2 bad guys, i.e. the robbers, but what about this priest? Was he a good guy or a bad guy? And so Ava thinks about it. Several of the children say good guys, and then Jackie says what made them good guys, and Ava said, well, they're not very good because they didn't help the man. Jackie said, so they aren't bad, but they aren't good. And there's a very long pause after this. And I remember looking around the group at the time and you could see everyone was thinking furiously, because they felt, I could see they were on the verge of something. And later, when I looked back on this, I realized they'd hit a boundary. They'd come to the end of thinking about their known world. This was new. So Jackie says, well, after this long pause, what would you say? And Ava says, yeah, they're like naughty, like not bad, not good, not good. And then Jackie adds, so naughty isn't bad, it's different. And Ava says, kind of bad. Now, adults might have different kinds of words for this, but Ava recognises an interesting position here. That we've relinquished at this point the good bad binary. Those are the words she has to use. So she's moving between positions. It's not quite one, it's not quite the other. He didn't hurt the man in the road. He didn't cause him to be there, but on the other hand, he didn't help either. So he's not bad and not good. This was a very interesting position to take. And then we moved on to context 9. In context 9, the print's a little small, but we're only really going to read part of this. Context 9, are we kind all the time? So after doing all of that other thinking, and this was all in sequence, all in the same session, Jackie's last context was asking the children themselves, I wonder if you are kind every day, all day. And what we do is she went around and asked each of the children in the circle in turn, and what we got was a whole bunch of yeses until we get to Micah, and Micah's the underlined bit. And Micah says, not to my sister, because she doesn't always play with me. Always doesn't play with me, sorry. And Jackie says, so sometimes you're not kind. And Jackie adds, sometimes Micah feels like he's not kind. Does that make you a bad person? Are you bad? And Micah shakes his head, no. And that Jackie says, sometimes I'm not kind either. And this took the conversation in a whole new direction. After that, we had people talking about, the children talking about all the things that sometimes happened that they weren't perfectly kind in. Times they'd been impatient with an auntie or a sibling or a friend. And there was this shifting of position from we are uniformly good to sometimes we can make unkind decisions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a bad person. And the shift here is subtle, but I think quite significant. So shortly after this was nearly the end. The children began to get a little restless. About this point, this discussion had been going on for about 25 minutes, and it had been an extremely animated, extremely involved discussion, and they were getting tired. So Jackie tied it up just shortly after that, and that's fine. The children did not completely change their minds, but they did begin to see that there are lots of shades of meaning within the concepts of good and bad, and the concept of friendship is also something that they began to rethink about in terms of who deserved friendship. Is friendship something you deserve, or is it something you should have? These were interesting thoughts. So just in summing up, some of the things that have found working theories were used for in supporting emergent criticality in young children. Some come from the example we just looked at, exploring moral reasoning, engaging in sense-making in challenging contexts, i.e. looking at ethnicity through art pedagogy in art pedagogy spaces, talking about friendship, love, good and bad in group discussions. Third point, bringing children to the boundaries of their current knowledge. And it was actually when I was analysing the data that the silences of the children became particularly interesting to me. I came to realise, possibly because I'd seen it and I could see they were thinking furiously, because I recognised that look. I do that same kind of look sometimes when I'm thinking and the answer's on my tip of my tongue, but I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite there yet. So they were thinking furiously, having come to the boundaries of their current knowledge and having those boundaries tested subtly, appropriately, but tested. Fourth point, creating space to challenge thinking and to change their minds. And some of these these weren't so much completely open changes or completely about faces. They were quite subtle changes, but they were there. Using arts-based pedagogies for comparative work and exploration of ideas. And lastly, using working theories as a tool for articulating uncertainty, for testing ideas, and for taking risks. Now, these examples did happen over time. They involved teachers reflecting, having dispositions of criticality themselves as they thought about the thinking of children and came up with ways to extend support and grow that thinking, because thinking matters. That's kind of my presentation. I just wanted to finish with some acknowledgements to Professors Linda Mitchell and Margaret Carr, my amazing supervisors, to the Marsden Fund, which my doctoral study was connected to, which I'm very grateful for, and of course to the remarkable children of the kindergarten, some examples of whom you've seen today of their incredible thinking and work, and the incredible and extremely patient teachers of the kindergarten, Jackie, Olivia, Tina, and Nilma. Kia kaha, kia aroha nui. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Raella. Ngā mihi nui, tino pai tō mahi. What an interesting presentation. I noticed at the beginning you used we a lot, and I think that really reflected your commitment to the partnership you had with your teacher participants and probably also your supervisors. So it's really lovely to see one of your supervisors and at least one of your teacher participants in the audience today. Such an interesting idea to have that metaphor of a critical landscape. You're right, that really set the foundations for why you've used criticality and ways that you've used it that I really noticed were in keeping with the image of children in Te Whāriki as competent and capable and confident learners. Because as you said, children are cognitively and emotionally engaged in issues of concern to them. One of our participants has asked, though you made reference to engaging children in topics that in ways that were appropriate to them, but that there might be some topics that were a little bit kind of too mature or too outside what we might engage with. And this, our audience member just wants to know if you could talk about what you consider a mature topic a little bit more, please.
I think that's quite context dependent, because the different things can be appropriate in some spaces and not in others. So I think we really depend on the professionalism of teachers to respond. It's not in this data, but one of the more challenging conversations I had with a child was about reproduction, because her sister, she had an older sister who was pregnant, and she was very interested in that, and she was very aware of how that pregnancy had happened. And so it was an opportunity to just let her say what she wanted to say and everything she knew, which was surprisingly a lot. And then for us to have a chat about that, and it was an opportunity for me to put back some alternatives, some other ideas, because she, on the basis of this, she had ideas about what relationships could look like in her own life. She was only 4, but she kind of had some things mapped out. But that I would not have raised that with a child. I would never have gone to a child and said, hey, let's talk about reproduction. It came up because the child talked about it and I could see it was important to her, and it was just the two of us. Yeah. And so so like I said, context is quite important. I knew enough about that child's life to know why this was important to her and why she wanted to talk about it. But would I take that on board with the whole group? Kaore. I would not. Certainly not unless everyone's sisters would fallen pregnant and it was an topic of interest to everyone. But some of the other stuff I did in my master's study, there was a whole thing about, and it had arisen very innocently, about girl things and boy things. And this was about a decade ago, before a lot of the current discussion on gender had come in. So we just handled it as girl and boy things, because some of the girls had said that a boy couldn't have a princess sticker. It was a girl thing. He couldn't have it. And so we just talked about that. I had a little copy of the video of them saying he couldn't have this thing and explaining why he couldn't. And we talked about that for a while and used different ways to explore that. But only because they brought it up.
Yeah.
And I guess this is why we started using this critical landscape thing of seeing what fits in that landscape and what might children respond to. And they don't always. Sometimes you put something out there and it falls flat, and then that's how you know that's not a flyer.
Yes. Yes.
So you let it go. So, and that happened a few times in the research at the kindergarten as well. Teachers put out questions and queries, and children didn't want to take it any further. But the ones they did is the research, is the stuff that's ended up in the research.
So you've said it's knowing children is quite critical as well. So that's something else where teachers really come into play, and being able to understand the context in which a topic might be raised as well. Because you mentioned reproduction, and of course that's the classic joke, isn't it, that children said, "Where did I come from?" and someone gives them a very elongated explanation of how babies are created, and the child replies, "Oh, because, Joanna came from England and I just wondered where I came from." So absolutely knowing the child, knowing the context is really important.
And I would have to add, I did have a little follow-up conversation with Mum when she came in as well. Just as part of that, closing that professional loop. So mum knows that we've had this conversation, and what her daughter's been thinking about and talking about. It's not something I would recommend it being professionally aware with some of these riskier topics.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. I remember having a conversation with some 2-year-olds about how babies were born, because one of them had just literally overnight observed her baby sister being born, and so she was sharing her new knowledge with her friends, and I happened to be the person on the spot at the time as the researcher. And I was thinking, how do I progress this? What is appropriate? What is not? And that was exactly what I did in the end, was not only discuss it with the teachers, but to say to it was the father in that case, because Mum was a bit busy having just had a baby, that the daughter had been sharing this information. And but the children are really interested in real topics, and that's what you've shown us in your lovely examples today too. The Chinese Barbie one, that was absolutely fascinating in terms of complex cultural ideas and real inquiries into identity. And I loved the idea of writing a letter to the Barbie company. Do you know if they ever got a response?
I'm not really sure. I don't know if much of one was given, but
because Mattel do make all kinds of Barbies, don't they? So it would have been really interesting to find that out, but maybe we'll find out another day from you. In your second example, another audience member has asked the question, because you were talking about child-led ideas. So just wondering where the idea of using that, or the extension of the parable, where that had come from, or was that something that was set in the curriculum as part of the godly learning? Did it come from Jackie to use that idea, I guess, rather than being child-led per se?
The framework of godly play comes from another man. Was it Jerome Berry? I meant to pull the book out of my bookshelf. Of course, I can't see it now. All I see is books. So that was one that they did quite regularly, but with different stories. What the child-led part was this absolutely adamant response to a question, and that's the bit that was revisited in that second episode.
Right.
Jerome Berryman. Thank you, Jackie. She's popped his name up there. Coming to my rescue again. Thank you, my friend.
Jerome Berryman. It was Jackie there, but yes, thank you, Jackie. Okay.
So yes, that was the child-led part, because not every episode, because I'd watched about 4 episodes of Godly Play, and a lot of the conversation had been quite, they were interested and there was discussion, but this was the one that they had, this particular question was something they had a real reaction to. Like they were adamant, absolutely adamant, that if you were bad, you didn't get friends. And that's an idea worth exploring.
Absolutely. And there were some really clever ways in which she used questions and different scenarios to encourage more
Yeah. It was
complex working
exceptional teaching,
theories
really,
to develop.
especially considering that she did it on the fly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
like,
that comes
yeah.
from huge experience and not only on the fly, but in front of a researcher too.
Oh,
So
yes.
yeah.
Like I said, very patient teachers.
So no, those are really interesting, and I can see that, you know, that they were really good tools that other teachers could draw on too. And you talked towards the end about teachers needing to have sort of dispositions of criticality as well. So I wondered if you could just share with us how you think teachers can develop that apart from through experience. Are there any you know, maybe you've got another book that teachers could read, or another idea, or a discussion point that they could have together to develop that disposition?
That's really probably worth a paper on its own.
You go, girl.
But, you know, from what I'd observed, like these teachers had dispositions of criticality before I arrived. And one of the reasons I'd asked to do the research there was because I'd seen this.
Yeah.
And they all did. I wasn't able to really talk about the work of Nilma or Tina in this, but they also did some really exceptional work in different contexts. And so part of having those dispositions of criticality is this are things of open-mindedness. I mean, we often talk about dispositions in relation to children, but things like open-mindedness, willing to take some risks, that has to always be measured against professionalism, I must hasten to add, but there's ideas of having your own knowledge and certainty in subjects. It takes a fair bit of confidence to embark on this work, and a little bit of planning. Not that that's necessarily a disposition; those are more teacher things. But the team had a lot of conversations. They're Reggio Emilia influenced.
Right.
That is an approach with a lot of democratic embeddedness, and it was that democracy practice that really fed through into this ongoing criticality and a need to question, to not take things at face value, but to also find pleasure and joy in the extended discussion, to value that and not look for simple answers. And the whole team did that. It was superb.
I can tell through that, having read your whole thesis. All four teachers were fabulous. We've run out of time, Raella, so kia ora, motu kōrero. Your sharing today has given us all a great deal to think about, to discuss, and to action, both in our pedagogies and in our own thinking as teachers and researchers. So ngā mihi nui ki a koe. I'll hand back to Justine now to close our webinar.
Kia ora, Helen, and I know that you probably would have loved to have had that conversation go on for a lot longer, as would I. So ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Raella, for your presentation. Children's working theories and how they express these using their 100 languages and then revisit and revise them is just such an endlessly fascinating topic. And what you've shared this evening will be a source of ongoing reflection and discussion amongst our early childhood seminar series audience, I'm absolutely sure. So anō ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Raella. We really appreciate you sharing your findings and your insight, and to the centre that so generously shared their teaching practices with you. To our early childhood seminar series audience, if you're hearing about Raella's research has inspired you to do further study or research of your own, please do go online and check out our available programs, especially the Masters of Education in Early Childhood. And thank you to everyone who completed the poll to win free enrolment in a postgrad paper. And we are pleased to announce that our lucky winner is Ambika. No, we don't have a surname for you, Ambika, but we do have an email address, hopefully. So Anita, our postgrad advisor, will be in touch soon to let you know how you can take up that enrolment opportunity. Finally, if any of you want to share or revisit this presentation, which I'm sure you will, please check out our Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel. The recording of this seminar will be available in a couple of days. And we look forward to seeing you again in September for our next online seminar with Dr. Kate McAnally from the Open Polytechnic. So keep an eye on your inbox for the flyer and registration information. Thank you again for joining us today, and we're going to close with karakia. Kia tau te rangi Māori o te rangi I tū iho nei, o papatuanuku I tākoto nei, o te taiao I awhi nei, ki runga I a tātou, tihei mauri ora. May the peace of the sky above, of the earth below, of the all-embracing universe rest upon us all. Behold, it is life. Take good care, everyone. Ka kite anō.
Kite. Thank you, everyone.